back with us to ancient Greece. "2,500 years ago, to the original Olympic Games. The ancient games, like our modern Olympics, include champions and cheaters, glory and scandals, bitter rivalries and contests of strength, speed and savage combat.
The spectators went there for blood, and blood is what they got.
This is the birthplace of sport. Winners are hailed as sons of the gods. Losers are disgraced and forgotten.
What's more emphatic than standing over somebody with your arm raised in the air? You knocked them out. A caveman can understand that.
Then, as now, it is the ultimate athletic competition. The emotions are eternal and unforgettable, a reflection of our own humanity at the ancient Olympic Games. A gymnasium in southwestern Greece, 2,500 years ago. Two men are at war in a pit of sand in a brutal combination of boxing and wrestling called pancration, a wildly popular and sometimes fatal sport. Closely watching the fighters in these elimination bouts are their trainers, official judges, and professional poets, the sports writers of their day, who can make or break a star's reputation. "30 miles away, a sacred valley called Olympia has been waiting for the past 4 years. There are dozens of shrines and temples here, dedicated to Zeus, king of the Greek gods. Now, this holy ground is about to come alive as the home of the Olympic Games."
Imagine you're a Catholic going to St. Peter's. Imagine you're a baseball fan going to Yankee Stadium. Imagine you're a patriotic American going to the White House. And roll it all together, and you would have part of the sensation that they would feel as they approach the Olympics.
In the months before the Games, couriers have gone out to the cities, states, and colonies of the Greek-speaking world, proclaiming a sacred truce, a brief pause in the region's unending wars, so that competitors and spectators may safely travel to Olympia.
Well, Olympia, I think, was a place that everybody wanted to visit at least once in their lifetime. Some of them would go for the religious aspects as a kind of pilgrimage. I think the sports fans would go there to see the best athletes in the world.
By 448 BC, the Olympic Games are already at least 300 years old. There are other athletic festivals, but the Games at Olympia are by far the most important. The World Cup and Super Bowl of ancient Greece. The earliest recorded Games Day included only a brief foot race, but the Games grew, and by 448, more than a dozen events for men, boys, and horses have been added.
We know about the ancient Olympics from various sources. This is almost like a jigsaw puzzle for the Greek historians. From vase paintings, we can see the pictures of athletes. From statues, we can see, for example, what a discus thrower would look like.
Many of the events are familiar to us because our modern games have copied them: the javelin and discus, wrestling, boxing, and sprinting. Others are unique to the ancient world: the race for athletes in helmet and armor, the spectacular four-horse chariots.
Greeks are sports fans because they were all practicing these sports. Boys grew up wrestling, boxing, running. All of these sports were in their blood, as it is in today. We, the Western civilization, and the Greeks are the only two people who put sports so central in our culture.
In 448 BC, Greece is entering a golden age. Construction is about to begin on the magnificent Parthenon in Athens, and a bold new experiment in government called democracy is taking root. But a warrior culture lies at the core of Greek manhood.
The Greeks were perhaps more violent than we are, but I think the real reason behind that is because the Greeks were so involved with warfare. Many of these Greek athletes actually participated in warfare, and therefore violence was very much part of everyday life.
The city-states of the Greek world clash constantly on the battlefield. And every 4 years, through their strongest sons, they confront each other again at Olympia. In sport, as in war, all that matters is winning. At the gymnasium, the Pancratiasts are training to earn their place in the Olympic finals. This is Demagitos from the island of Rhodes, son of a great Olympic champion. The father is Diagoras. Thanks to the poetry of a writer named Pindar, his fame has endured for 2,500 years. Pindar is a poet for hire. He'll praise any athlete willing to pay him. A few sweet words from Pindar, and fans start to believe that a man like Diagoras is more than human.
Diagoras was very much thought of as godlike, because it was believed if you're going to be a great athlete like Diagoras, the only way you could achieve this success was if you were descended from the gods.
The sons of Diagoras, like all Olympic athletes, are required to spend 1 full month before the Games in training and elimination rounds. This noble panel of officials is the International Olympic Committee of the ancient world. They hold supreme authority, but just like today, their rules are not always obeyed.
In the ancient world, there was no sense of fairness. There was no joy of participation, which is a modern concept. The Greeks went to the ancient games for one reason, and that was winning. There are examples of bribery. There are examples of collusion, hometown judging. It was not the good old days as people think.
As the Olympic Games grow in importance, cheating becomes so rampant that a row of statues to Zeus, paid for by disgraced cheaters, is erected at Olympia. Only the pedestals remain.
I've walked down that hall of shame, and I've looked at what's left of the little stumps of pedestals where the footprints from the statues were, and thought about the feeling I would have if I had been the athlete who's cheated, whose statue would be there for that, whose parents were named, the city that they came from named, and the eternal shame of that.
About 200 to 300 men will compete in these games. Women are not included. This is a young man named Chryson, a sprinter from a Greek colony in Sicily. Chryson's desire to win is so strong, he vows not to touch a woman or another man until after his race.
You can have the greatest body, you can have the greatest coach, you can have the greatest technical equipment, but if you don't have that flame, that desire, and that will to overcome everybody else, to be there, to be the best, you won't succeed.
At Olympia, that desire is sometimes mixed with pure greed, especially when the wealthiest men in Greece enter their finest horses in the chariot races. Some owners are ready to cheat and bribe their way to victory. The ancient Greeks invented sport, but not sportsmanship. Arkesilaos of Sparta, however, is ready for anything. He will drive his own chariot to ensure that no one tampers with it. Cheating is a high-risk game because not only the judges, but the gods are watching.
It's helpful to remember that for the Greeks, religion and sports, whether it's chariot racing or boxing, were not separate activities. The Greeks believed that the Greek gods were very much like human beings, more powerful, but generally with the same likes. And if the Greeks liked sports, then they thought that the gods would like sports performed in their honor as well.
Greeks believe that Olympic champions are so strong and brave that they must be more than mere humans. When Diagoras won his Olympic title, he was proclaimed son of Hermes, the god of athletics. He leads his sons to the altar of Hermes in the sacred valley as they prepare for their own battles at Olympia. One more ritual remains before the action can begin. An oath to Zeus of honesty and fair play.
You did not come as a team. You did not come as Team USA. You did not come as the Canadians for a particular event. You came as an individual. You paid your own way. Your father came with you, along with presumably your brothers as well.
Meitai. Go now. Setai Paroton Kekon.
The ancient Greeks believed in dozens and dozens of gods, but the greatest of all of them was Olympian Zeus. So he, in his power, could strike with lightning bolts. He could uphold the idea of justice among men, a worthy god to whom to dedicate your finest energies in Olympic competition.
An August moon rises over the sacred valley. The power and the pain of Olympic Games will begin at dawn. In 448 BC, Olympic competition begins with the four-horse chariot race. It is the Formula One event of the ancient games.
The resources required to become a successful chariot racer were very much similar to people who undertake yacht racing today. Ted Turner, for example, or anyone who is in auto racing. We can estimate that one racehorse might cost you $30,000, $35,000.
Much of our knowledge of chariot racing comes from the richly detailed pottery that formed part of the winner's reward.
We have vase paintings, which are very useful for technique, because putting a series of vases together to depict a sport will often tell us a lot about equipment.
The chariots are flimsy and fragile, designed for speed, not safety. The charioteer controls his team with a whip in one hand and leather reins in the other. The middle horses are yoked to the chariot for maximum pulling power. The outer horses are attached only by thin straps. Their role is to steer the rest of the team around the tight and dangerous turns. The horses are barely larger than our modern ponies. Protective horseshoes won't be invented for hundreds of years. The millionaires who own the teams have come to strut their wealth and power.
In some ways, it was about politics, oddly enough, because it was aristocrats who raced chariots. And therefore, tyrants who wanted to be considered aristocrats in their own cities would enter chariots to become a member of that same class.
In 448 BC, the rivalry between war-hungry Sparta and democratic Athens is intense and all-consuming. These city-states have just begun a series of wars that will last 100 years. For a few tense days, the Olympic truce transfers their aggression to the Games. The race will come down to a contest between two teams, an aristocrat of Athens and Arcesilaos of Sparta. Most chariot owners left the actual driving to hired men or slaves. But the power-hungry Arcesilaos will guide his own team.
One of the reasons I think they were so involved in horsemanship was very much a part of warfare. They believed in the concept of winning at all cost, the concept of arete, athletic excellence. They hated to lose. And therefore, I think people like Arcesilaus in 448 wanted to compete himself for the good of the state, for the good of Sparta.
In Sparta, boys are taken from their mothers at the age of 7 and immersed in athletic and military training. This is the origin of state-funded sport. The Spartans are the East Germans of the ancient Olympic Games. A love of fast horses runs deep in their national soul and is crucial to their military triumphs.
I think when you see in the rivalry between Athens and Sparta, perhaps with a modern analogy, is the difference between the USA, the Western democracy, and the Eastern Bloc countries.
At Olympia, even the wealthiest horsemen are not immune to a common superstition. They will do anything to get an edge.
And what they did was to take a tablet of clay, they would write a message on it, they would bury it perhaps in the ground, maybe in a well, and several of these have survived, especially from later times.
Some tablets carry prayers for good fortune. Others call down a curse on the opposition. They are the performance-enhancing drugs of the ancient world. The lust for victory is overwhelming. Bribery is one of the most common tactics. Paying off a groom to poison a rival man's horse. Honest trainers look down on such crude behavior. More important, so does Zeus. The carvings on his temple allude to a mythical chariot race marred by cheating. It's a not very subtle warning to mortals not to try the same thing with Zeus in the house. The race course itself is just a rough pasture, about 600 meters long and perhaps 300 meters wide, with no central barricade to prevent a head-on crash.
You would be looking essentially at a field. There was an embankment on one side, an embankment on the other, and a basic track that was probably cleaned up a little bit, but not much before the racing would start.
The Greeks were obsessed with not giving an opponent any advantage. They designed a starting gate that prevented any team from getting a head start toward the all-important first turn. This invention is the origin of the staggered start, still used in Olympic distance running. The gate is arranged with the stalls recessed in order from the outside lane. As the teams are loaded into the gate, stiff ropes hold them back. In the center, a statue of an eagle with outstretched wings. The symbol of the god Zeus is connected to a lever in the starter's box. As the lever is flipped, the eagle will appear to take flight. The ropes are lowered in order, and the race is on.
There seems to be a rule that in the start of the race, you had to keep to your lane, as you do in an 800 meters race. But after that, it seems that anything would go.
For the Spartan Arcesilaus, this is the point of no return. He has wagered his fortune, his political future, and his own life on his skills as a charioteer.
Somewhat comparable to American automobile racing, in the sense that there was a sense of danger. You would not know that you were going to crash in every race, but very few safeguards. So death was in the air.
Racing headlong down the straightaway is a matter of sheer speed. But turning a four-horse team around a narrow column is a tricky and potentially deadly challenge. Here, the skill of the horseman comes into play.
The number one danger point is the turning post. because it was not a bank track. You had to get as close to it as possible. Your axle could catch up against the post. You yourself could catch up against the post, potentially, and turn over. But if you veered too wide, then you would lose the race. It was always a choice at that point.
A wrong decision lets another team take the lead. But there are 11 more laps to the race, and many turns.
There's also no central barrier between the two posts. The Romans decided that they needed a central barrier between the two posts to keep chariots from crossing over from one lane to the other, and we do have a description of a head-on crash. You know that you're coming to the end because you hear the trumpet that announces the last lap. If you did not already know, if you'd lost count. Everyone raced all out because everything was at stake. This is your chance to win the Olympic Games. You are going all out, and hopefully your horses and your chariot would hold together until the finish line.
The gamble by Arkesilaos pays off. He is draped in the red ribbon of victory. He has earned the prize he came for. Victory for Sparta, a shameful defeat of Athens on sacred Olympic ground. When the horses leave the hippodrome, the crowds move on to the stadium, where 40,000 voices will hail the contenders for the most coveted title of all, fastest man on earth. In modern Olympic Games, no event carries more prestige or more excitement than a sprint to determine the fastest man in the world. 2,500 years ago, the ancient Greeks felt the same way.
You would be assembled in the stadium, perhaps some 40, 45,000 people strong, not sitting in comfortable seats, not having paid tickets, but standing on the green banks around a very humble stadium by any modern standard. The excitement would be palpable. There would be sweat and dirt.
What you're smelling is this tremendous stench from the people. There would be a lack of hygiene among the people. There would be no bathrooms, as we call them today.
Only one woman is allowed to enter the stadium grounds, a priestess of the goddess Demeter. The stadium is located on the site of her shrine, and nobody wants to make Zeus's sister feel unwelcome. According to one account, any other female caught at Olympia would be thrown off a cliff.
Many people have debated the issue of gender at the Games, why women were not allowed. And there's no one answer, but the one that makes the most sense to me is going back to the religious context. This was an all-male celebration to a male god. The women, it's awkward to say it, but we would be perceived as polluting the site, especially mature women coming into this situation.
Females did have their own competition at Olympia, and it's known as the Heraia because this is a festival in honor of Hera, the wife of Zeus, At the Haraya, there was only one athletic event. Now, one athletic event was a stade, or more correctly, it was 1/5 of a stade, and therefore this is more of a religious festival. It's more of a festival concerned with ritual and indeed with initiation.
In ancient Greece, each Olympiad itself is linked forever with the man who wins this race.
Chariot, athlete, tute sti Olympia.
Chryson from Sicily and 7 rivals will run in today's final, dashing straight down the 200-meter dirt track. 8 men carrying the prayers of their families and years of dedication and training.
The beginning of the race, for me, you don't really think about a lot of things. I think that all the work that you've done, you should have already done all of that work before you got there. So there's really not a whole lot to focus on other than the things that you've done in the past to get you there.
A striking aspect of the ancient games was the total nudity of the athletes in the stadium. Charioteers wore sort of a costume, a chiton, but the other athletes were completely nude. No sandals, no jock straps, nothing.
Well, in the year 720, we have a famous athlete called Arsippus, who took part in a race. His shorts fell off. He finished the race without them, finished first. And all his rivals thought that was the secret to his success. So in the next race, they all ran naked. Some people suggest that athletes could run faster without the loincloths, aerodynamically. Tests at the University of Michigan have shown that this is not entirely true.
Running naked probably wouldn't work, just because I wouldn't want to go down the track flogging your quadriceps. You know, that might hurt a little bit.
Some runners favor another tactic, a string attached to the foreskin, sometimes tied around the waist, a practice known as infibulation.
Some of the older commentators suggested that part of this, that is, part of the leash, and it was called a dog's leash, which is attached to the penis, part of it was held by the trainer. And if the trainer wanted the attention of a runner in practice or somebody else, he would give it a tug, and I guess that would really get the attention of the athlete.
At the starting line, a cord keeps the runners from taking off before the start is called. The penalty for a false start is a shameful whipping by the judges, a punishment usually reserved only for slaves. To be flogged is a terrible disgrace for a free Greek man in front of 40,000 citizens and mighty Zeus.
I wouldn't find it demeaning, because I think that you get flogged now, you get punished. I think it's just, we're in a different place, a different time. So I think being flogged then is equal to you being penalized for a false start, and if you get 2 of them, you're out of the race.
At the modern Olympic Games, the winner of the 100-meter dash can expect to earn millions of dollars in bonuses and endorsements. In 448 BC, the rewards are just as great. On the starting line at ancient Olympia, there is a lot more at stake for Chryson and his rivals than a red ribbon and olive leaves.
They could expect to receive an enormous amount of money from their home city. Now, this is something like 500 drachmae, which doesn't sound much to us, but this would be the equivalent of several years' pay for the average person.
It has been said that if you won at the ancient Olympic Games, you were set for life. There were material benefits that definitely came with it. In ancient Athens, for example, you could go to the town hall and get a free meal, basically, as long as you lived. There would be cash prizes. There would be seats of honor at the theater. In other places in different times, you might get relief from taxation. You might get a special parade into town.
Now the moment has come. 20 seconds of running to crown an Olympic champion, to make a man a god.
The athletes were especially motivated by competition. There was great shame at finishing second. That's one of the basic differences between the modern world and the ancient world. It's winning or nothing.
I expected to win, I wanted to win. I had already beaten my opponents mentally leading into the game, so I knew exactly what their weaknesses were, and I still hadn't shown all my strengths. To be the fastest man on the planet is fantastic, but being the Olympic champion was something that defined me as an athlete.
Olympic champions like Chryson are sport's first millionaires. The other men take home nothing but shame.
The losers would sneak home by back streets. Their mothers might be embarrassed by them. The victor would come in with a great parade and everybody would celebrate. But there's nothing like the modern notion that just being there is enough.
That's really how it is in society now. If you're very good at what you do, then you're applauded for it, and if you're so-so, then you get the sympathy vote.
Also held in the stadium is the pentathlon, the first multi-sport event in Olympic history. The name of the events are familiar, but the techniques are different. The triple jump is performed with hand weights to increase distance.
There are examples of athletes in the 5th century who could jump over 55 feet. In the modern world, nobody can come close to that. Some of the experiments have shown that if you start the jump by throwing these weights forward in front of them to give the added distance, and then bringing them behind them for the balance, that would achieve the approximate distance. It was believed that the athlete did not turn a revolution. This was based on the famous discus of Myro.
The javelin is thrown with the aid of a loop of leather for added force.
It would be wrapped around the javelin, would also be wrapped around the 2 fingers of the hand, and the purpose behind it was to give an added momentum to the javelin.
If one man wins all 3 field events, the pentathlon is over. If not, then a foot race and wrestling break the tie. To the ancient Greeks, the pentathletes are the ultimate examples of manly beauty, grace, and power. In 448 BC, a man named Keton wins the pentathlon with such magnificent form that he may have been a model for the sculptor Myron.
Myron was at the height of his career at this time. It is a possibility, but many of the artists took their models not from a single athlete, but maybe from a group of athletes. They took the best qualities from each.
The charioteers and the runners have had their moment of glory. Now it is the fighters' turn. 3 men enter the Olympic spotlight. The great champion Diagoras and his 2 sons. A new generation come to battle for the honor of their family and the glory of the island of Rhodes. We are 2,500 years back in time. On the verge of a completely familiar event, Olympic boxing. Perhaps the most primal of all forms of human combat. Today, Diagoras, the former Olympic champion, will watch his son Akousileos fight for his first Olympic wreath.
I think if you're talking about the modern Olympics and the ancient Olympics, boxing would be much more violent. It would be much more violent because there were no time limits. The blows were largely at the head. There's no padding. The blows were at the nose. From vast paintings, we can see the blood spouting out of there. You could gouge out the eyes. You could knock out the teeth. And some of the athletes pretended to be tough and swallowed their teeth so as not to encourage their opponents.
Fighting is very basic. It's kill or be killed. I mean, that's what gives you that edge. That's what gives you that adrenaline flow. The very fact that you know that he's going to do his best to beat you into submission. And of course, you have to counteract that or make sure that you don't get beaten into submission. You have to beat him into submission. It's simple as that.
What I got here, George, are ancient himentes. Now, these are not the gloves that you were familiar with. These are not the 8, 10-ounce large padded gloves. These are long strips of leather. And this is the ancient form of boxing glove from about 2,500 years ago. The idea is to wrap it around the hand. It is largely protection. What I'm going to do is try and demonstrate it here on your left hand. If you can hold on to that right there. We will do several cross pieces. We will go to the wrist. We'll do a couple of loops there, a cross piece there, a second cross piece, and then I'm going to put a couple of loops around here. We can even manage a third one, and then we're going to hold it underneath. We'll try and tighten it up a little bit, pull this in, and there you've got a himentes from 440. We know about this from vase paintings, and there is an example behind me there from approximately the same time period. So what do you think about that, George? Are these cross pieces going to help you much?
Well, they will help you, but to a limited degree. Today they use gauze bandage and tape, much for the same purpose, essentially trying to protect your hands from getting broken, from the bones in your hand behind the knuckles getting broken.
Right.
When people break their hand in boxing, it's essentially because of the impact here on the knuckles, but the bones back here are the little small bones that break. They're popped up like so and break. So the idea is to keep these bones as flat as you can. How well your hands could absorb hitting somebody on the head, that'd have to be a great concern. You know, I mean, it'd be very easy to bust your hand. If you got a busted hand, hard to hit somebody with the next shot.
2,500 years ago, there is no ring, no ropes, no bell, no limit to the amount of punishment that a man can absorb or deliver. Victory comes by knockout or by raising the single finger as a sign of surrender. But surrender is far from these men's minds.
If you had an overriding fear of getting hurt, it would limit you in a lot of ways. You wouldn't have that free flow of things, and you'd be too uptight. It'd be very difficult to be a good fighter and have a fear that kind of cripples you.
The contest is intense, exhausting, and savage. After more than an hour, both men remain standing.
And you can't allow yourself to think that I can't win. You can't allow yourself to think that I can't. You always have to think you're only one punch away from knocking the other guy out. Only one punch away from winning the fight. That's what you have to think.
They are circling around. Navigatus is a little bit worried. His father, Diagoras, is even more worried.
I would like to have been a warrior in those days, you know, when you know the fight could go on virtually forever. I think I would like that. But I don't think it's for everyone, but for someone like myself, who was a pretty durable guy, it would have been right up my alley.
Mueste.
As the hours grind on, the judges force a final showdown by decreasing the dimensions of the fighting zone.
You have to move to the next event, and therefore, to make it move quickly, you bring in the ladders or the measuring rods. Now, these are set between the two athletes. They make the space much smaller. They're held by two officials on either side. This will bring a decision, and often it will end in a kind of downward chop where the victor will knock his opponent out.
At last, after 3 hours, Akusileos lands the final crushing blow. The fight is over, and the son of the great Diagoras is himself an Olympic champion.
Boxing is the most honest of sports in most ways, and it's the clearest way, I think, that you can pronounce yourself as a winner. What's more emphatic than standing over somebody with your arm raised in the air? You knocked them out. A caveman can understand that.
Next, it will be the turn of Damagitos as he enters the arena to compete in the most savage event of the ancient Olympic Games, the Pankration. Fighting for his father's name, his brother's honor, and his own life. At the Olympic Games of 448 BC, only one event remains, Pankration, the most brutal and the most popular of the ancient Greek combat sports.
The pressure now is on the second son, Damagitos. His father had won 16 years earlier. Diagoras and Akusileos would be on the bench. There would be extreme emotions as they circle the ring.
This is sport and war combined, hand-to-hand combat to the brink of death.
Pankration was a very brutal sport. Today you can compare it with ultimate fighting. Virtually everything was allowed except for gouging out the eyes and biting.
Victory is gained by knockout or surrender, and the tactics range from kicking to bone cracking, from toe holds to strangulation.
When you entered the stadium, you accepted the responsibility of death. So if you were killed by a legal blow, then there was no legal responsibility against the person who committed that blow.
The object is not to kill the other man because if the victim has fought nobly, the olive wreath may be awarded to his corpse.
There's lots of grappling and pulling and punching and twisting. And also there's this nasty habit of breaking the fingers. And this was very much part of the Pankration. And one athlete in particular had this nasty habit of breaking his opponent's fingers and was known euphemistically as Mr. Fingertips.
The poet Pindar describes one of the classic moves of Pankration like this. The athlete who falls on his back stretches out his arms in front of him and draws up his feet, kicking powerfully, just like a fox, who, when the hook-clawed wild eagle rushes on him, turns on his back to defend himself. There is no time limit. The contest may last 5 minutes or 5 hours. the giant Damagitos, the way to destroy a smaller, quicker man is to concentrate on the legs, twisting an ankle until it fractures and the pain becomes unendurable. The loser's name is lost to us. The gods have no gifts for him. Now Damagitos is no longer merely the son of Diagoras. He is the family's third Olympic champion.
The pankration was the most famous sport. It was the sport which everybody liked. So to win in the pankration was often considered to be the ultimate victory.
The symbolic race of athletes in armor marks the end of Olympic competition and the sacred truce. Soon, Olympia will fall quiet again. But first, all must assemble for the spectacular ceremonies of the final day, when the champions will be honored in the presence of the gods. A humble wreath of olive leaves crowns the sons of Diagoras. Far greater riches await them on their return to Rhodes.
When it's all over with and that wreath is being placed on his head, that is the moment of satisfaction when he must tell himself he didn't do it all himself. He aspires to be more than mortal. Zeus will strike him down.
I remember when we got our medals, and I remember what it was like standing on the podium. You go through that in your mind almost every day of practice. You visualize being there, doing that, living that. That's your drive.
From a modern point of view, these wreath prizes don't seem like much, but to an ancient Greek, they had tremendous symbolic quality. The wreath, after all, is composed of olive leaves, leaves associated with Zeus, and it represents, in effect, divine favor. What that wreath will bring you is a notion of kleos, or fame, enduring fame. You could live on in two ways. One is through your family, and Diagoras had done that with two fine sons who would go on to Olympic victories, and his grandchildren would go on to Olympic victories. The other way was to win a victory yourself, so that your name would be remembered.
At this moment, legend holds that someone in the crowd calls out, "Die now, Diagoras." There is nothing left for you but to ascend to the realms of the gods. The name of Diagoras of Rhodes still echoes as champion and father of champions. Akusileos has chosen his father's sport of boxing and won the sacred crown. Damagitos has triumphed in the savagery of the pankration. They sought immortal fame, and they achieved it, for we still remember them today. Chryson of Himera will go on to win 2 more Olympic sprinting titles, a feat no modern man has ever equaled. And the triumph of Arkasileos in the 4-horse chariot race begins a streak of 7 Spartan victories in 8 Olympiads, broken only when Sparta is thrown out of the games for violating the sacred truce. The heroes are crowned, the crowds depart, and the games are over. The sacred valley of Olympia will lie quiet for 4 years, only to reawaken yet again for another 5 days of ritual and sport. This will continue for 800 years until Roman emperors, having conquered the Greeks, order the games and the worship of Zeus abolished. Through the Middle Ages, the sacred valley is destroyed by floods, the stadium buried, the hippodrome washed away. The site is abandoned, but the dream endures.
I think it's a magic place. I mean, a lot of people just see dust and dirt and crumbled stones and say, Who wants to see the ruins again? I could go back and go back and go back. It is like a touchstone. It really is. It's about who we are, where we come from.
In 1896, Baron Pierre de Coubertin revives not only the sports of the ancient Greeks, but the spirit. Every other year, a procession of priestesses comes to this sacred valley, lighting a torch that will be carried to a new Olympic city as millions cry, as in ancient times. Let the games begin.